The strongest argument against plural marriage on this entire show doesn't come from a wife who left. It doesn't come from Christine, who walked away and found something better. It doesn't come from Janelle quietly building her exit. It comes from a young woman who was raised inside the one household that supposedly worked, the household everyone points to as the success story of the family. It comes from Aurora, Robyn's daughter, a girl Kody legally adopted who grew up entirely inside the belief system, who knew nothing else. And when even she begins to hesitate, when she looks at the life her mother chose and quietly says, "I'm not sure that's for me," that tells you something no departing wife ever could. So tonight, let's talk about the quiet rebellion happening inside Kody's last standing household and why it might be the most important storyline this family has. Let me set the stage because Aurora's position in this family is unique, and you have to understand it to grasp why her doubt carries so much weight. Aurora is one of Robyn's children from her first marriage, and when Robyn married Kody, Aurora came into the Brown family as a child. In 2015, Kody legally adopted Robyn's older children, Aurora among them. So unlike the kids who were born into the chaos of an already fracturing plural family, Aurora was folded into the household that became Kody's primary focus, the one that, by most accounts, received the lion's share of his attention and resources in the later years. If any child in this family was positioned to see plural marriage at its most functional, its most stable, its most appealing, it was the children in Robyn's home. That's what makes this so striking. Because here's the thing. When a child raised in a difficult or broken situation rejects it, people can dismiss that. They can say, well, that kid only saw the bad version. Of course they're soured on it. But Aurora didn't see the bad version. She saw the version the family held up as proof that the lifestyle could work. She lived in the household that got the husband full-time, the household that wasn't being left behind. And if the child who saw the best-case scenario still walks away from it, then the problem isn't a bad implementation. The problem is the thing itself. You can't blame Aurora's hesitation on having only witnessed dysfunction, because she witnessed the family's showpiece. And she still isn't sold. Now, I want to be very careful and precise here, because we're talking about a young person, and I'm not going to invent things about her private life. What we actually have to go on is what aired. In episodes that aired around late 2024, we saw Aurora, along with others in the next generation, grappling on camera with questions about plural marriage, reflecting on whether it was a path she would want for herself, showing real uncertainty about following in her mother's footsteps. That's the confirmed part. That's what the cameras captured. Beyond that, you'll find all kinds of fan chatter and speculation about her personal life and relationships. And I want to flag clearly that that stuff is speculation, not fact. So let's build this entirely on what we actually know. A young woman, raised inside the lifestyle, openly questioning it on screen. And even just that the openness of it is remarkable when you think about the environment she grew up in. This is a family whose entire public identity was built on defending plural marriage, on insisting it was a valid and even superior way to build a family, on pushing back against the idea that it was harmful. For a child of that family to sit in front of cameras and express doubt about the central premise of her own upbringing takes a kind of quiet courage. She's not screaming, she's not staging a dramatic rejection, she's just being honest about her uncertainty. And in a family that spent decades performing certainty, honest uncertainty is its own kind of rebellion. I call it a quiet rebellion deliberately, because that's exactly what it is. It's not loud, it's not a public denouncement, it's the most powerful kind of doubt. The kind that comes not from anger, but from simply looking at the life in front of you and deciding it isn't what you want. Aurora isn't rebelling against her mother in the teenage sense of slamming doors. If anything, it seems gentler and sadder than that. It's the rebellion of a young person who loves her family, but has quietly concluded that the thing that shaped them is not the thing that will shape her. And that quiet, loving, clear-eyed no is far more damning to the lifestyle than any furious rejection could ever be. Let's talk about what this means generationally, because this is where Aurora's story stops being about one girl and becomes about the future of the entire family. The Brown family has 18 children between the wives. 18! And the great unanswered question hanging over all of them is simple. Will any of them choose this life? Will plural marriage continue into the next generation, or does it end here? And the early evidence, from what we can see, is pointing toward the end. The kids, by and large, are not embracing the lifestyle. They're going to college, building conventional careers, entering monogamous relationships, living lives that look nothing like the one their parents built. And Aurora, coming from the household that was supposed to be the strongest advocate for the lifestyle, hesitating right along with them, that's the clearest sign yet that this experiment has no next chapter. Think about what that means for Kody specifically, because it's a quiet tragedy for him. Kody didn't just want a plural family. He believed in it as a way of life, something with spiritual significance, something worth defending against a disapproving world. A man who believes deeply surely hopes on some level to see it continue, to see his children carry it forward, to feel that the path he chose was validated by the next generation choosing it too. And instead, one by one, his children are looking at the life he built and choosing differently. Even the children in Robyn's home, the household closest to him, the one he prioritized. There may be no lonelier feeling for a true believer than watching your own kids gently decline to follow the faith you organized your entire life around. And here's the layer that makes Aurora's case especially poignant. She watched plural marriage from the winner's seat, and she still said no. Robyn is the wife who stayed. Robyn is the only wife Kody is still married to. By the logic of the family, Robyn won. So her children had front row seats to the supposed reward of the lifestyle they got from the dad who stuck around, the household that wasn't dissolved. If the lifestyle were genuinely appealing, if it delivered on its promises, you'd expect the children who experienced its best version to be its biggest champions. Instead, even from the best seat in the house, the view apparently wasn't good enough to want for herself. That's the detail that should keep Kody up at night. Now, let me offer the fair counterpoint, because this channel doesn't deal in one-sided stories. It's entirely possible that Aurora's hesitation is simply normal. Plenty of young people don't want to replicate their parents' lives, regardless of what those lives looked like. Kids of doctors don't all become doctors. Kids of farmers move to the city. Maybe Aurora's uncertainty is less a verdict on plural marriage specifically, and more just a young person figuring out her own path, the way every generation does. That's a reasonable read, and I won't pretend it isn't. But here's why I still think it matters even if that's true. Because in a family whose entire identity was built on the claim that this lifestyle was good and right and worth passing on, even ordinary, healthy independence from it reads as a referendum. When the whole point was continuity, the absence of continuity is the story. There's also something worth saying about Robyn in all of this, and I want to say it with some compassion. Imagine being Robyn, watching your own daughter express doubt about the very life you chose, the life you defended, the life you gave up your previous family structure to enter. That has to land in a complicated place for a mother. On one hand, every parent wants their child to be free to choose their own path. On the other hand, a child's quiet rejection of your central life choice can feel like a quiet judgment of that choice itself. I don't know what Robyn feels watching Aurora hesitate, but I suspect it's not simple. And I suspect there's a part of every parent in that situation that wonders whether their child sees something they themselves couldn't, or wouldn't, let themselves see. And let's sit with the kids' perspective more broadly, because they are the silent witnesses to this entire family's story. The Brown children didn't choose to grow up on television. They didn't choose plural marriage. They were born into a structure and a spotlight and a set of beliefs, and they spent their formative years absorbing all of it. The good and the bad, the love and the tension, the favoritism and the fractures. And now they're adults, or nearly adults, forming their own conclusions. What's striking is that these conclusions are being formed not from the outside, by critics who never lived it, but from the inside, by the people who know it most intimately. When the insiders quietly opt out, that's a verdict carrying more authority than any outsider's opinion ever could. I think the reason this storyline resonates so deeply with viewers is that it speaks to something universal. We all, at some point, have to decide which parts of how we were raised will carry forward, and which parts will set down. Every generation does this. Every person looks at their parents' choices and decides what to keep and what to leave behind. Aurora is just doing that very human thing in an unusually public, unusually high-stakes setting. And there's something moving about watching a young person navigate that universal task with grace, loving her family while quietly choosing a different road. It's not rejection and anger, it's discernment. And discernment is what growing up actually is. So what happens now? What does the future hold for this quiet rebellion? I think we'll see more of it, not less. As the rest of the 18 children move further into adulthood, as they marry and build families of their own, the pattern is only going to become clearer. The lifestyle that defined the Brown family for a generation will in all likelihood not be carried forward by a single one of the children. And that means the most honest verdict on plural marriage, the verdict the show spent years arguing about, won't be delivered by a critic or a wife or a commentator like me. It'll be delivered by the children, by their choices, by the lives they build. And so far, that verdict is being written in the quietest possible language. The simple, steady decision to do things differently. There's poetry to the fact that it ends this way, isn't there? Not with a bang, not with a dramatic on-camera denunciation, but with a generation of young people gently declining to continue. Aurora's hesitation isn't a scandal. It's something quieter and more final than a scandal. It's the end. The lifestyle doesn't get overthrown, it just doesn't get chosen again. And a way of life that isn't chosen by the next generation is a way of life that fades, no matter how fiercely the previous generation believed in it. The Brown family's grand experiment may simply run out of volunteers. And the first sign of that was a thoughtful young woman, raised in the best version of it, quietly admitting she wasn't sure it was for her. I want to dwell for a moment on that adoption, because I think people skim past how significant it is. When Kody legally adopted Robyn's older children in 2015, that was an enormous act of commitment. In a family where, for years, the marriages themselves were spiritual rather than legal, Kody chose to make a legal, binding, permanent commitment to Aurora and her siblings. He chose them in a way the paperwork could prove. And that's what makes the generational hesitation so loaded. These aren't kids he was distant from. These are the children he went out of his way to claim, formally and legally, as his own. So when one of those very children quietly questions the lifestyle he built, it isn't the doubt of a kid on the periphery. It's the doubt of a child he deliberately pulled to the center. The closer you bring someone in, the louder their quiet no echoes. There's a psychology to growing up inside a tight belief system that I think is worth naming, because it explains why this generation's verdict matters so much. When you're raised inside a particular way of life, especially one that the outside world questions, you grow up with two competing forces. On one hand, there's everything you were taught, the conviction, the defense of the lifestyle, the sense that your family is right and the critics are wrong. On the other side, there's what you actually observe with your own eyes, day after day, year after year. For a while, the teaching usually wins, because it's all you know. But as kids grow up and start comparing what they were told to what they actually lived, the gap between the two becomes impossible to ignore. And the young people who close that gap honestly, who trust what they saw over what they were told, are the ones who quietly step away. Aurora seems to be one of them. And she's not alone, which is the part that turns one girl's hesitation into a pattern. Across the Brown children, we've seen a range of the next generation move in directions that look nothing like their parents' choices. Some have spoken more openly than others. Some have been pointed in their criticism. Some have simply lived differently without making a statement of it. And some have stayed quiet entirely. I'm not going to put words in any specific child's mouth, because they each deserve to tell their own story their own way. But step back and look at the whole picture, and the trend is undeniable. The children of this famously plural family are, overwhelmingly, not building plural families. They're building the ordinary, monogamous, conventional lives that their parents once held up as the lesser path. The kids voted, and they voted with their lives. It's worth thinking about how the show itself handles this too, because the edit has a real stake in the outcome. A program built on plural marriage doesn't necessarily want to broadcast that the next generation is opting out. That's an uncomfortable storyline for a franchise whose entire premise is the lifestyle. So when we do see moments like Aurora's on-camera uncertainty make it to air, I think we should take them seriously, because they survived an editing process that arguably had reasons to minimize them. If anything, what we see on screen is probably a softened version of what these young people actually feel off-camera. The doubt that makes it past the edit is likely the tip of a much larger iceberg. And I keep coming back to the human heart of this, because underneath all the analysis, this is a story about a young woman and her mother, and a choice. Aurora loves Robyn. That much seems clear in everything we've seen. This isn't a story of a daughter turning on her mother. It's a story of a daughter who can love her mother completely and still decide that her mother's path isn't her own. Those two things can coexist. And learning that they can coexist is one of the hardest, most important parts of becoming an adult. You can honor where you came from without agreeing to repeat it. You can be grateful for your upbringing and still choose a different life. Aurora seems to be threading that needle with a grace that a lot of full-grown adults never manage. So when I look at Aurora, I don't see rebellion in the angry sense at all. I see something more like quiet wisdom. I saw a young person who was handed a ready-made answer to one of life's biggest questions. How do you build a family? And who had the courage to set that answer down and decide for herself. That's not a scandal. That's growth. And it may be the single healthiest thing happening anywhere in the Brown family right now. So I want to turn it over to you now, because this one invites real reflection. Do you think the next generation of Browns walking away from plural marriage is the clearest verdict we'll ever get on whether the lifestyle works? Or do you think it's just normal young people doing the normal thing of charting their own course, and we're reading too much into it? And here's the bigger question. I really want your take on, out of all 18 Brown kids, do you think a single one of them will ever choose plural marriage for themselves? Tell me in the comments, because I genuinely want to know where you land, and I read every single one. If you'd like me to do a full breakdown of where the next generation stands on the lifestyle, the kids who've spoken out and the ones who've stayed silent, let me know, and I'll build that next. And if you appreciate that we handle the younger members of this family with care and stick to what's actually known instead of chasing every rumor, then do me a favor and subscribe, because thoughtfulness is what we do here. And there's a lot more of this family's story still left to understand.